Good evening, I'm William Brangham. Jeff Bennett and Amna Nawaz are away. On the NewsHour tonight, a judge once again presses the Trump administration for answers on why it hasn't tried to bring back a man wrongfully deported to El Salvador. The federal government freezes billions of dollars in grants to Harvard University after the Ivy League institution refuses to give in to President Trump's demands. And China cuts off exports of rare earth minerals used in automobiles, aerospace, and other critical technology as part of this escalating global trade war.
We're highly dependent on China. I mean, consider that we don't have any heavy rare earth processing facilities here at home.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith.
Cunard is a proud supporter of public television. On a voyage with Cunard, the world awaits. A world of flavor, diverse destinations, and immersive experiences. A world of leisure and British style. All with Cunard's White Star service.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Inside a Maryland courtroom today, another escalation in the legal battle over the man wrongfully deported to El Salvador. Judge Policini says she's not yet holding Trump administration officials in contempt, but she said she would not tolerate gamesmanship or grandstanding. She is ordering the administration to produce details about what, if anything, is being done to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia back to the United States. Our White House correspondent Laura Barone-Lopez has the latest.
William, Judge Sini scolded the Trump administration for doing, quote, nothing to facilitate Kilmar Abrego Garcia's release from El Salvador's custody and return to the United States. The judge also said that comments made by El Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele in the Oval Office were not evidence. President Bukele said that he would not return Garcia to the United States. For more, I'm joined now by Mary McCord, Executive Director of the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection at Georgetown University and former acting Assistant Attorney General for National Security. Mary, thanks so much for joining us this evening. You wrote in the Washington Post that Judge Sini should order senior officials to testify what they're doing to facilitate Garcia's return. It appears as though the judge maybe did just that today. She launched this intense 2-week inquiry phase and said that she would allow for deposition of up to 6 administration officials. What's your reaction to that, and what do you make of the administration's repeated claims that this is in President Bukele's court?
So obviously we have two separate things there, and I think Judge Zinas did exactly what she had to do at this point, because last Friday she ordered daily progress reports, not progress reports, a daily declaration by a person with individual knowledge, a government official with individual personal knowledge, answering the 3 questions she had. Where is Mr. Abrego Garcia? That question did finally get answered on Saturday. What is the government doing to facilitate his return? And what additional steps will the government take to facilitate his return? Those 2 questions what they're doing, what they've already done to facilitate, and what they're continuing to do are still not answered because each declaration was really obfuscation. So what she's saying now is I'm going to allow there to be discovery with depositions, meaning live testimony under oath by government officials to get to the bottom of what they actually are doing to facilitate his release. The government, at the same time, is arguing a couple things. They're arguing that facilitate should be interpreted so narrowly that it simply means that if the president of El Salvador decides to release Mr. Bukele, Freudian slip there, release Mr. Abrego Garcia, that the government will receive him here. The government will accept him. Of course, they've also said they would put him into immediate custody and initiate new deportation proceedings. The other thing they're saying is that it's out of our hands to even request that the president of El Salvador, Mr. Bukele, do anything because this matter is now in his hands, that Mr. Abrego Garcia is being held under the domestic authority of El Salvador.
Mhm.
But mind you, he was not extradited there pursuant to some criminal charges or anything like that. So these things, these are constantly shifting explanations, and the court is getting to the bottom of it.
On the lack of those criminal charges, in the last 24 hours, senior administration officials like Secretary of State Marco Rubio have repeatedly accused Garcia of being a member of the MS-13 gang and a terrorist. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt accused him of human trafficking. And so far, the administration has appeared to provide no evidence to back up those allegations. They also said what you noted, which is that if he's returned, they'll try to deport him to another country. What is the typical pathway, legal pathway, for deporting someone who had protected status like Mr. Garcia did?
So in deportation proceedings, and this all goes to the same type of notice and opportunity to be heard, due process under our law, that the Supreme Court said that those who were deported to El Salvador under the Alien Enemies Act, it's the same thing he's saying, that they get a chance to challenge that. Here, deportation proceedings would be different than what the Venezuelans might do in terms of bringing a habeas corpus petition in federal court. Deportation proceedings, there would be a chance for the person whose ability to stay here is being questioned, for them to put on evidence about anything they can do to support that they are lawfully present. And in terms of what he had achieved in 2019, he was able to testify before an immigration judge that he had left El Salvador because he was persecuted by gangs. He was a teenager. His mother sold pupusas. Gangs were trying to extort her and threatening her children and wanted her to put them into the gangs. He was sent here by his family. He's never broken any laws here. There are no criminal convictions here. And he fears that he would be persecuted if he were deported to El Salvador. That is where a judge held in 2019 that he may not be deported to El Salvador. So in order to reverse that order, the government would have to go back into immigration court and prove up something that would suggest why that needs to be reversed. They're saying he's a member of MS-13, newly designated a foreign terrorist organization in late February by the Trump administration, but they have not proved that he is a member of MS-13.
In another front of Trump's anti-immigration agenda, a Columbia student, Mohsen Madawi, who is a legal permanent resident, was detained yesterday while appearing for a citizenship interview in Vermont. The administration is trying to remove him under the same immigration provision that they're using against students who engaged in pro-Palestinian protests. Madawi has not been charged with a crime. Is this an escalation on immigrants who have legal status?
There's no question. I mean, just like with Mahmoud Khalil, also a student at Columbia University, also a lawful permanent resident or green card holder. That's the same as the student who was taken into custody just today, or maybe it was yesterday. This is what we're starting to see on different campuses. Students, in some cases even faculties, here lawfully, sometimes on student visas. But these two men had a much higher level even than that. They are lawful permanent residents. They have the right to be here. They have a right to work here. It doesn't mean you have your citizenship. You're on a path towards citizenship when you have your green card. And after being here a certain number of years without any criminal charges. You can oftentimes obtain your naturalization to citizenship. And that's my understanding what this young man thought he was going to see immigration to talk about, his naturalization. And instead, he's being told essentially that his privileges are being revoked because the Secretary of State has decided that he is a national security threat. He has filed, just like Mr. Khalil, he has filed suit in federal court alleging First Amendment retaliation and due process violations.
Mary, with the limited time we have left, on another deportation effort front, President Trump is planning to convert a stretch of the U.S.-Mexico southern border to an army base with the intention of using it to deport migrants. Could this potentially be a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act?
Well, let's just be clear. The U.S. military may not engage in domestic law enforcement, including directly arresting and detaining and deporting people under federal immigration laws without violating Posse Comitatus Act. There would have to be an Insurrection Act invocation based on the things that are in the predicate for Insurrection Act that would allow the U.S. military to engage in domestic law enforcement, things like arrest, seizure, search, detention. However, on a military base, military officers, military police could detain trespassers and pass them off to law enforcement. And I think that's what is at risk of happening along this border.
Mary McCord of Georgetown, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
In the day's other headlines, Iran's supreme leader said initial talks with the U.S. over his country's rapidly developing nuclear program were taken well, but he downplayed prospects for a deal. In his first comment since negotiators met last Saturday, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said he's neither overly optimistic nor overly pessimistic about the new dialogue. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has walked back comments that suggested a willingness to allow Tehran to enrich uranium at a low level. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff made that suggestion last night on Fox News.
This is going to be much about verification on the enrichment program and then ultimately verification on weaponization. We're here to see if we can solve this situation diplomatically and with dialogue.
Taking to social media today, Witkoff called on Iran to dismantle its nuclear program altogether. The next round of talks is expected this weekend, either in Rome, as U.S. officials initially indicated, or in Oman, where last week's meetings took place. Russia today said that recent talks with the U.S. were constructive, but they wouldn't give any sort of timetable for a peace agreement on Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that there are no clear outlines, but there is a political will to move towards this agreement. Kyiv and some of its European allies have accused Moscow of dragging out talks because it's not serious about wanting to end the war. Today, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte visited wounded soldiers in Ukraine with President Volodymyr Zelensky. He indicated a willingness to give the discussions time to progress.
These discussions are not easy, not least in the wake of this horrific violence. But we all support President Trump's push for peace. Other allies, including through efforts led by France and the United Kingdom, are ready, willing, and able to shoulder more responsibility in helping to secure peace when the time comes.
Meantime, Russian authorities say a barrage of Ukrainian drones hit homes and buildings in its Kursk-Borja region. One person was killed, 9 more were hurt. It comes days after a devastating Russian attack on Ukraine's Sumy region that killed dozens. New data from the CDC shows nearly 1 in 31 children in the U.S. has autism. That's up from the last count in 2020 that showed 1 in 36 children suffered from the disorder. The data shows boys are diagnosed at a higher rate than girls, and it's more common among children of color. The report said the recent increase was likely due to better screening and awareness. The causes of autism are still unknown, but ample studies have ruled out childhood vaccines as a factor. Also on public health, both Arkansas and Indiana have moved to ban soda and candy from the food stamp programs in their states. They're the first to ask the Trump administration to remove those items from SNAP, which helps low-income Americans pay for groceries. Indiana's Republican governor made his state's announcement alongside Dr. Mehmet Oz, who heads the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, as well as Trump's health secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
More SNAP money is spent on sugar drinks and candy than on fruits and vegetables. That changes today.
We need to change our food system in this country so that we start giving our kids foods that are going to actually make them healthy and imbue them with vigor and ambition and a dream.
The Department of Agriculture, which oversees SNAP, says it is fast-tracking the state's requests. Candy and beverage companies called the approach misguided. And it was a down day on Wall Street, but without any tariff bombshells, it kept market movements moderate. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost just over 150 points, while the Nasdaq had a negligible loss of just 8 points. The S&P 500 followed suit, also down by less than 10. Still to come on the NewsHour, the plight of hundreds of thousands of Sudanese refugees who have fled to neighboring Chad. Why abortions are rising in the U.S. despite more restrictions, plus much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Yesterday, Harvard University became the first major school in the U.S. to push back against the Trump administration's efforts against colleges and universities. Last week, the administration told Harvard that nearly $9 billion of its federal funding would be in jeopardy if it didn't change its hiring practices and address allegations of anti-Semitism. But Harvard rejected that request, writing that, quote, neither Harvard nor any other private university can allow itself to be taken over by the federal government. The administration immediately froze $2 billion in federal grants to the school, and President Trump suggested the school should lose its tax-exempt status if it keeps pushing political, ideological, and terrorist-inspired or supporting sickness. Joining us now is someone from Harvard who supports the university's position. Cornell William Brooks is a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Professor Brooks, very good to have you on the program. Alan Garber, who's the president of your university, separately wrote, quote, although some of the demands outlined by the government are aimed at combating anti-Semitism, the majority represented direct governmental regulation of the intellectual conditions at Harvard. Is that how you see it?
I see it precisely that way, and I have to commend President Garber for taking a financially, fiscally consequential stand, a politically difficult decision, but one that was made morally simple by the fact that the Trump administration essentially demanded that Harvard essentially welcome the government into the regulation of Harvard, the management of Harvard, the hiring and firing of Harvard, the admitting of students at Harvard in a way that would be unprecedented. To be clear about this, this would be like alleging some violation of the law in terms of a company or a corporation, and thereafter the government demanding to run that company, run that corporation. And that is unlawful. It's unconstitutional, and it is profoundly unfair.
I hear everything that you're saying, but as you mentioned, this could be a fiscally very risky proposition. I mean, some argue that it's easy to support this idea now, but what happens if there is a suddenly $9 billion hole in your budget for all of that academic and scientific research? Won't that make it very difficult to do your essential mission?
Oh, most definitely. Harvard does research on all manner of illnesses and diseases and conditions afflicting human society, certainly the country. Harvard trains teachers that go into classrooms, public servants that toil away in communities to address poverty, to address education, to address inequities in our society. To lose $9 billion or to have $2 billion frozen affects the mission of the school. But the magnitude of the pain, the size and scope of the risk is an indication of the threat, and it is also a measure of the character of this university. So in other words, to have a school that's so committed to doing its work, it is willing to risk its financial existence. That's a measure of the threat that we face. Let's be very, very clear about this. When you look at the letter that that was sent to Harvard, this list of demands very loosely related, in many cases, in most instances, not related to anti-Semitism at all. It has everything to do with literally poll testing, surveying the faculty, staff, and students as to their political views. A clear violation of the First Amendment. It would invite the government into choosing faculty, admitting students, choosing staff. No university, no college should be willing or can be willing to do such a thing.
In his letter to the administration, President Garver did say the university is addressing issues of anti-Semitism. I hear your point that it was a minor part of the Trump administration's claim, but how serious a problem is anti-Semitism at Harvard? Many people believe it is a very serious problem.
I take the matter of anti-Semitism seriously. There have been instances at Harvard in which Jewish students have felt threatened. Jewish students have experienced mistreatment. Jewish students have been treated in ways that are not commendable, as we have seen elsewhere in the country. But the fact of the matter is, Alan Garber and his colleagues, people in the faculty and students, I might add, have taken steps in terms of addressing policies, coming up with programs, creating a body to study, analyze, and propose responses to anti-Semitism at Harvard. But note this, the demands placed upon Harvard have nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And as a civil rights lawyer, I need to be very clear about this. I think it is an insult to the victims of discrimination to use their harms, to use their hurt to accomplish essentially an ideological, partisan, political agenda at their expense.
You do have a significant slice of the population that believes that elite universities are liberally biased and that they're inculcating this worldview into students. How do you go about addressing that larger concern, separate from what the Trump administration is doing?
Well, one of the things that you can do is that you can make sure that your hiring process is one in which you reach out to all parts of the country, all parts of the political spectrum, and represent the full range of ideas in terms of hiring teaching faculty, research faculty, and certainly everyone who's a part of this academic community. Can we have more of that? I suspect so. But is anyone screening anybody else, anybody out? I don't think so. And I want to be very clear. I teach students from every corner of the country, all parts of the world, all across the political spectrum, and it is an absolute joy. So if there are ways in which Harvard can improve, big government, intrusive government, and academic takeover are not the way to do it.
That is Cornell William Brooks at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
So to get a different look at the unease at colleges and universities right now, both from the threats to federal funding as well as the arrests of international students, we spoke to a trio of editors at student newspapers about what they're seeing and how campus communities are reacting.
I just feel like it's instance after instance that national news outlets are paying attention to things going on college campuses.
It is an incredibly unique time to be a member of the Columbia community.
When DEI was cut, I think then it really kind of hit home for a lot of people. And it felt like, okay, this thing is real, this thing is here, and this thing is affecting us. My name is Zane Yaman. I am a junior at the University of Michigan, and I'm one of the co-editors-in-chief of the Michigan Daily.
My name is Maven Navarro. I am a junior. I attend the University of Alabama, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Crimson White.
My name is Shay Vance. I am a junior at Barnard College of Columbia University. And I'm the editor-in-chief of the Columbia Daily Spectator. The news coming out of Columbia is so frequent and also so deeply impactful for so many people. A lot of people are raising concerns about the state of academic freedom at Columbia and what many people are identifying as an acquiescence to the Trump administration's demands. A lot of people are worried about, their visas potentially getting revoked, or, even Mahmoud Khalil, who is here on a green card, was detained. So I do think it is having its impact on people's daily lives. It's definitely a main topic of conversation right now at Columbia, the federal funding cuts, the ICE activity around campus, and the scrutiny that's been facing our campus.
We've had a lot of protests on campus. There's been a lot of, discourse going on between students. So kind of chaotic, to be honest. I would say maybe like 50-50 Republican and Democrat divide on campus. I kind of see it on both extremes. So I do see people that did vote for President Trump that are kind of starting to regret their vote, especially with the tariffs going on now. There's a lot of students that do say things like, oh, well, I didn't know that this would happen. I didn't know it would actually be like this. There are students that didn't vote for him that are kind of continuing the I told you so, that this was going to happen, and are frustrated with the people that might have voted for him. And then you have the people that did vote for Trump and do not regret their vote. They're glad that he is doing the things that he said he was going to do.
When we broke the news that the University of Michigan was announcing cuts to DEI, we haven't seen such a large influx of op-eds and letters to the editor about one specific topic, since October 7th. I think a lot of people aren't angry necessarily that the programs themselves were cut, but more so that the university is sort of capitulating or aligning itself with the Trump administration and its broader initiatives and its broader goals. So I think one thing that's been key in covering this thing has been finding all of these perspectives and finding the perspectives that sort of illuminate the breadth of opinions.
There's definitely been a chilling effect, I would say. Protests are still happening. They're getting smaller. Even if they're not less willing to be going to protests, people are less willing to be identifying themselves at protests. Our reporters are as aware as anybody about what the risks are right now. I think that student newsrooms have a right to be a bit concerned about the ability to report on campus and the ability to do so completely safely.
My job is to tell the truth and to share the truth. And so sometimes that has been challenging as well this year. Students and the community have not always been super welcoming of things going on. And even if it's not our fault, I mean, we're the messengers of it and we are sharing what is going on in the world. And so sometimes we do kind of take the brunt of their frustrations instead of the thing that we are reporting on.
People have come to us and they've asked, like, hey, can I be anonymous? I'm an international student. I know I said this and I do believe it, but I'm uncomfortable because, my safety, my physical safety, I might be harmed if this is up. Those have been conversations that our organization, the Michigan Daily, has been having and will continue to have with people as it comes up. When you think about what it means to be a college student now, I think it is sort of being altered. Like, what is your relationship between the administration? And how much do you trust it? And how much do you trust it to look out for you? And how much do you take it upon yourself to look out for yourself?
The past 2 years have really eroded the trust between Columbia's administration and Columbia's student body. And that's for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of consensus that there is lacking communication and transparency. This transparency issue also impacts student press. Student journalists at Columbia, just like student journalists at any university, have a real stake in their institution. And we, very openly want what's best for our community because we're members of this community and we know our campus better than any other journalist. And so we tend to approach stories, with more care, with more attention to detail, with more attention to the truth, with more nuance, definitely. And that impacts everything we do and has certainly impacted the covers that we've done over the past couple of years.
Tonight, President Trump launched a new national security investigation that could lead to tariffs over critical minerals, the vast majority of which are processed by China. The president's announcement comes after Beijing restricted exports of those minerals, which are essential for everything from cell phones to fighter planes. Nick Schifrin reports that the trade wars are playing out as Chinese leader Xi Jinping is touring Southeast Asia, portraying Beijing as the region's most reliable partner.
In Vietnam, they brought the pomp and circumstance to welcome Xi Jinping, and two communist leaders walked the red carpet so Beijing could portray itself as a benevolent source of regional stability.
China will insist on joining hands rather than throwing punches, tearing down walls instead of building barriers, connecting instead of decoupling.
Xi's Southeast Asia tour was pre-planned, but he's using it to confront the U.S. for what Beijing calls an irresponsible trade war and recent sanctions on Hong Kong, China's top official there said today.
The repeated attempts of the U.S. to contain and suppress Hong Kong will backfire and harm itself. And those peasants from the U.S. will soon be crying tears in front of China's 5,000 years of civilization.
That confrontation of the U.S. now extends to critical minerals. Beijing is restricting the export of rare earths and magnets that are almost entirely refined by China. Those minerals vital for everything from the U.S. military's most advanced fighter jets and missiles to every single cell phone and electric vehicle on the planet. For perspective on all this, we turn to Gracelyn Bhaskaran, a mining economist and director of the Critical Minerals Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a think tank in Washington. Thanks very much. Welcome to NewsHour.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with a basic fact. The White House says that 70% of U.S. imports of rare earths come from China. Translate that for me. How dependent is U.S. and allied military and civilian technology on China?
We're highly dependent on China. I mean, consider that we don't have any heavy rare earths processing facilities here at home. So ultimately, while we have reserves of rare earths, even when we extract them, they actually go back to China for the midstream processing and potentially the manufacturing of magnets. And these rare earths are absolutely vital for all of our defense technologies and civilian uses, from MRI scanners to electric vehicles. So it's extremely consequential to our security.
We've been talking for years, of course, about critical minerals as vital to all technology. But what we're talking about here today, what China is trying to restrict, are a very specific subset of critical minerals, rare earths, things like scandium, terbium, things that most people have never heard of. So explain how these particular rare earths are so critical and why.
So rare earths are actually a bit of a misnomer because they're not rare. They're actually everywhere. However, they're often found in small quantities, and then they get separated out of the rock before they get processed and manufactured into the critical goods that we discussed. Now, the big difficulty that we have is that we have fallen behind in critical minerals. And rare earths have long been weaponized. So I think back to 2010, China and Japan got into a fishing trawler dispute, and then they were cut off. What's happened with this new announcement is that heavy rare earths were targeted. So we have critical minerals, we have rare earths, and then we have heavy rare earths. And these heavy rare earths all go to China. So 100% of separation for these rare earths are being done there.
So Beijing in the past has restricted some of these exports, as you just mentioned, but they're taking additional steps in the last week in response to the U.S. Pressure when it comes to trade. What are these additional steps, and are they actual restrictions, or can companies apply and actually get China to approve these exports?
So as you said, there's a kind of a runway of policies here when we come to export restrictions, right? First of all, there's going to be a pause in exports while they get a licensing system in place. Second, a licensing requirement is actually a dynamic tool, which means that I can change who gets licenses and how much they're licensed to export, which gives them a lot of negotiating power. And then the third thing to note about licensing is it could be tightened quite significantly as the trade war escalates, and it could ultimately come down to a ban. We've already seen that 15 defense and aerospace companies in the U.S. are no longer able to access dual-use goods from China, which means they will not be able to use these rare earths that come from there.
The flip side is, how dependent is China itself on these exports? Do we know whether China might use this as a negotiating ploy when it comes to the Trump administration and trade pressures? Or is there an interest from Beijing in having these export controls be permanent?
going to be a negotiating tool. Everything feels like a negotiation in the new political era. The reality is that a ban would be very consequential to the Chinese economy, because not only is it a mining and processing, it's the entire economic ecosystem in infrastructure services that go with it that would ultimately come to a halt. What it does do is it gives them power in a tariff war, because they actually have an absolute advantage here. It's not comparative. So the idea is that, if the tariffs come back down to a more reasonable level, it stimulates their economy, but ensures that we have access to this very critical material.
Let's talk about future possible alternatives to Beijing. The United States government is investing in facilities here in the U.S. It's investing in a facility in South Africa. It's considering investing in Brazil. Is there an alternative when it comes to these rare earths to Beijing?
We're probably not going to decouple anytime soon. We've been mining rare earths for some years in the United States, but we've never built separation facilities and so even though the U.S. government has spent over $400 million through the Defense Production Act over the last 5 years, these facilities are not ready to go. And when they are online, they're only going to be able to produce a small fraction of what China produces. Ultimately, for the U.S., what determines whether the U.S. fails or succeeds here is twofold. One will be, can we get these facilities online quickly? And the second is, at the end of the day, geology is where geology is. And we have less than 1.5% of the world's rare earths here at home in the US. So there's going to be a need to link this up to our foreign policy to secure rare earths from other countries. We've seen it feature quite prominently in the discussion in the last few months in the context of potential engagement with Ukraine and Greenland. There are many other sources of rare earths, and as we've seen even with the Chinese president in Vietnam and Malaysia, they're looking to do the same thing to cement a certain dominance. So there's a larger strategy that's needed, and there's no doubt the Department of Defense recognizes this as a critical vulnerability. They've prioritized what we call the mine-to-magnet supply chain and building it here at home by 2027. But it takes time, it takes capital, and it takes a lot of willpower.
Gracelyn Boscarin, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Access to abortion has changed dramatically in the 3 years since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. 12 states currently ban the procedure with limited exceptions, and another 4 have outright bans after 6 weeks of pregnancy. Stephanie Tsai looks at a new report that examines whether these bans have led to a drop in abortions, as supporters had hoped.
William, according to the latest data from the Guttmacher Institute, a research organization that advocates for abortion rights, there were just over 1 million clinician-provided abortions in states where it was legal in 2024. The numbers were up slightly from the previous year. The data further shows that the number of people who crossed state lines for the procedure dropped nearly 9%. For an update on the current state of abortion access, I'm joined by Mary Ziegler, professor at UC Davis. She's written several books on abortion rights, including Personhood, which is out later this month. Mary Ziegler, thank you so much for joining the NewsHour. So 3 years out from the Dobbs decision, several states have outright bans, and yet the number of abortions tallied by Guttmacher has held steady. And other data shows abortions have increased more than 10% since 2020. What is your reaction to this latest data?
It isn't surprising. In a sense, we've seen that passing a ban and enforcing a ban are two very different things, particularly when both pills and people are crossing state lines in the way we've seen since 2022. And I think the real question going forward is either whether states can project their power across state lines, for example, by prosecuting people in states where abortion rights are protected, or whether instead the Trump administration is going to impose some sort of national limit that changes the calculus. Otherwise, I think we'll likely continue to see data like these in the years to come.
And the Guttmacher Institute says the total number of abortions it tallied is likely an undercount because it doesn't reflect self-administered medication abortions in states where that practice is banned. Is there any way to get a true sense of how many abortions are occurring in the current landscape? And I ask this because the states that have banned abortions have the clear intent of reducing the number of abortions. But can we really tell how many are occurring?
Not really, right? I mean, and this is not also not a surprise. It was historically very hard to evaluate how many abortions were happening in America before Roe v. Wade. And that's no surprise because even if it's not a crime to take abortion pills, it can be a crime to facilitate the taking of abortion pills. So even if someone in a state where abortion is a crime isn't themselves going to get in criminal trouble for taking those pills, they might be exposing other people in their lives to criminal charges if they say anything. So this is almost certainly an undercount, and it's very hard to get data when the penalties for doing these acts in some states are serious, right up to life in prison in some instances.
I want to give you another data point of the example of Florida, where a 6-week ban went into effect in May of 2024. They saw the most dramatic drop in the procedure, with abortions in the state down by 12,000 last year. Mary, is Florida an instance where the restrictions may be having the intended effect?
Absolutely, in part because Florida was not just a place where people from the state were having abortions. Florida was similar to New Mexico or Illinois. It was a regional hub for people who lived in states that already had bans. And so while we may see some Floridians circumventing the state's abortion ban by going elsewhere or ordering pills, we're not seeing people traveling to Florida for abortions because of the state's ban. Also, I think the Southeast in particular is a place where travel for abortion is much harder. There really are no nearby states geographically that logically come to mind as places one would go, which is why Virginia is the next on the list. But Virginia is, of course, much more remote to some of these states than Illinois would be to certain states or New Mexico. So that's, I think, part of what you're seeing. Florida is no longer a regional hub in the same way.
I want to touch on the legal landscape. We've seen years now of back and forth between state laws and courts. In Idaho, a court recently expanded medical exemptions, as you know, to the state's ban. And even Texas's legislature is looking at reworking language on medical exemptions in its ban. Is there, Mary, a general pivot toward moderating some of the more strict abortion bans at this point?
I think it's the pivot has been as both the Texas legislature and the Kentucky legislature have put it, to clarify the bans. There's not really an attempt so much to make abortion more available in those states as to clarify that legislatures already wanted it to be available under certain circumstances, and they believe physicians didn't know what those circumstances were. We even saw that in the Idaho litigation, where the Idaho Attorney General's office essentially said, we've allowed some of these abortions all along. I think we'll continue to see back and forth about that, though, because it's still very hard to write laws that are actually clear and actually cover all the circumstances in which a pregnancy would become dangerous enough for the law to kick in. That's especially true when the penalties we see authorized by these laws are so high that physicians are going to be really reluctant to take risks. So I think these attempts at clarification are growing, but I'm not convinced they'll work.
To that point, you also have proposed laws that some would say go to the extreme. Again, in Texas, a bill has been filed that would force municipalities to test the water for the presence of hormones and mifepristone. Are you seeing a lot of political will, especially in conservative states, for those types of efforts?
I think there's a lot of frustration in conservative states about the inability to enforce these laws. And the inability to stop abortions from happening. And of course, states can do but so much without the intervention of the Trump administration. So there's a lot of spitballing happening in conservative states now about ways to make bans more effective than they currently are. All of them focused on abortion pills. I don't know if the testing the groundwater solution is going to get off the ground in particular, but I think we'll almost certainly see some legislation coming out of this session from the states that tries to shut down access to pills, either by targeting out-of-state actors or in-state actors in ways we haven't seen before.
That is Mary Ziegler at UC Davis. Mary, thank you so much for joining us with your perspective.
Thanks for having me.
For 2 years now, Sudan has been torn apart by civil war as the Sudanese armed forces have fought with the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Millions of Sudanese have fled. many to neighboring Chad. The UN says it is now one of the worst humanitarian crises in recent memory, and caring for the millions in need has been made harder by the Trump administration's shutdown of USAID. Correspondent Neha Wadekar and filmmaker Zoe Flood, with the support of the International Women's Media Foundation, traveled last year to document the crisis on Chad's eastern border, where hundreds of thousands fled violence but then faced starvation. They report now that the situation is, if anything, worse. And a warning, accounts and images in this story are disturbing.
I come from Sudan, but now in Chad, refugee.
In Sudan, we were always happy. We played football with friends, but since we arrived here, we were not really happy.
At 10 years old, Abdusalam Mustafa has already experienced more trauma than many adults ever will. I met Abdusalam and his mother, Munira, in a refugee camp on the Chad-Sudan border, where they live in the corner of a large tent partitioned among dozens of families.
It was difficult to move around. We set off to go to a nearby town that was safer. We went late at night, but we were attacked on the road. People were killed, some were hit by cars. Everyone was running for their lives.
Abdusalam and his family are among many thousands of non-Arab civilians who fled brutal attacks by the Arab Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, on West Darfur's capital city, Al Geneina. The nonprofit Human Rights Watch described the waves of violence by the RSF and allied militias as a systematic campaign to remove, even by killing, members of the Mazalit ethnic group.
When I was coming back with my brother, we saw people killed on the road. Some were slaughtered, some were beaten and tied up, and then as we were walking, we were shot.
Abdusalam's 5-year-old brother was shot dead while the boys were still holding hands. Munira found Abdusalam with a gunshot wound in his belly, his stomach covered with blood.
My son could not walk, so I took him on my back. In our family, more than 38 people were killed. They raped women in front of us. We were also beaten.
Over 765,000 new Sudanese refugees have fled to Chad since fighting broke out in April 2023. Already one of the poorest countries in the world, Chad is hosting one of the largest refugee populations of all of Sudan's neighbors. Most escaped with almost nothing. Many, like Bashir Sanin Bara, a used car dealer who also fled Al Geneina, are deeply traumatized.
I was walking, and then I was shot. I fell down, and I stayed there for days. Now, my arm is not working, nor is my leg. And now, I can't walk.
And it's a crisis that shows no sign of abating. When we visited, an average of 1,000 to 1,500 people were crossing at the Adre border post every day. Behind me is the border of Chad and Sudan, and over here is the line of new arrivals that are waiting to be screened. We've been here all morning, and this line has stretched all the way back to the wall, even though they've been processing all morning. We've been told that 72% of the new arrivals coming through this border point are children.
My child is only 21 days old. He was born after we had already fled our homes. The Arabs attacked us and took our luggage. 8 people were killed. Some went missing.
Many new arrivals end up in makeshift shelters at a transit camp outside the small border town of Adre, which used to have a population of just 40,000 people. Today, Adre itself is hosting more than 235,000 refugees, as Ying Hu from the UN's refugee agency told me.
You can see the conditions are very dire. There is no adequate basic services such as water or health services, and they live in the shelters that cannot withstand the weather. So what UNHCR is trying to do is to relocate them from the border area to safer locations.
The UN's refugee agency, UNHCR, can't work fast enough to build new sites with actual infrastructure. Not only are more people arriving daily, but UNHCR's operations in eastern Chad are chronically underfunded. They've received just 17% of their $246 million appeal so far this year. All aid agencies are stretched thin across the globe, but humanitarians told me that it's especially bad here. People leaving Sudan are fleeing not only war, but hunger as well. Last year, famine was officially declared in a refugee camp in North Darfur. Over 25 million people in Sudan faced acute hunger, and many refugees are arriving here already malnourished. At this outpost in the Adre transit camp, healthcare workers assess children for malnutrition.
This morning only, the team screened about 70 children, and 1 in 4 was actually severely acute malnourished. And what does that mean to be severely acute malnourished? It means their life is at stake, so they have to get treatment.
The nonprofit Doctors Without Borders, known by its French acronym MSF, has set up a pediatric malnutrition ward to treat serious cases.
What we're entering here is our emergency or our kind of triage area. And this actually will be expanding because we're in that period of the hunger season as well as even kind of getting ready for a malaria season as well.
Aziza Muhammad's 7-month-old baby had been ill for nearly a month when we met, since the family arrived in Chad. He was hospitalized for severe malnutrition.
Since we arrived here, we haven't had enough food because we don't have any money. I was given milk for the baby to drink. I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy.
And while clinicians here are doing their best, MSF said that when NewsHour visited, between 3 to 4 children were dying of malnutrition and associated illnesses each week in this unit in Adre. Meanwhile, aid agencies are already working around the clock to keep everyone fed. This is a major food distribution site run by the World Food Program and its partners. On average, they say between 15 and 20,000 people are served here per day. These food distributions are supposed to happen monthly, but this one has been delayed due to funding constraints. As you can see, people arrive here early, and some of them have to wait all day in temperatures that are reaching above 110 degrees for their food rations. WFP says that last year's lean season, which extended from June until August, was the worst in Chad's history so far. The agency says it expects 2025 to be even worse, bringing a record number of people into food insecurity. Miriam is looking after 7 children on her own. Her husband was killed in an attack in Darfur in late 2023.
I came here to wait for food early in the morning. I didn't even take tea. It's been almost 4 or 5 days since my children last ate any vegetables or meat.
Added to the pervasive hunger, the specter of disease here in the overcrowded and often unsanitary temporary settlements.
The main diseases for now, because it's the dry season, the respiratory tract infection, like flu, due to the dust and everything, and followed by diarrhea and malaria.
Aid agencies are also racing to provide access to safe drinking water to avoid the spread of waterborne diseases in the camps. Beyond the basics, the residents of these camps are doing all they can to rebuild their lives in what are seemingly impossible conditions. Many children in the transit camp, where there is little formal infrastructure, have been out of school since the conflict started. Some adults, such as these brothers who are lawyers back in Darfur, are taking the situation into their own hands, teaching children with whatever school materials they can get. Older students are also finding ways to fill their time and reconnect with friends outside of the safety of the classrooms they left behind in Sudan. But for too many young people, the trauma they've experienced means they're not able to return to normal life just yet.
I can't play alone. I don't have anybody to play with. My friends say that because I've had an operation, they cannot play with me.
All of the young survivors of Sudan's violence have to try to heal, both in body and in mind. Their parents can only hope that they will have the chance to feel young and free once again. For PBS NewsHour, I'm Neha Wadaker in Adre, Chad.
Remember, there is more online, including a look at the upcoming deadline for getting your real IDs, what you need them for, and how long you have before the federal mandate kicks in. That's on our YouTube page. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm William Brangham. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you so much for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. For more than 50 years, advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world at hewlett.org.
Moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
I love seeing interns succeed. I love seeing them come back and join engagement teams and seeing where they go from there. I get to watch their personal growth. It makes my heart happy.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.